Ribba sostană. Ribba sostană.
To remind us that we are based in Yelamu, the traditional unceded lands of the Ohlone people. And just a couple things about the Green Arcade. We're doing a nice event next week over at the third floor of McCroskey. I know some of you have been there before. With David Lichwager, who's a fantastic photographer, works mostly for National Geographic, and he has a new book. And he did the photographs above the desk over there. And the new one is octopus and jellyfish and seahorses. Also, next month, John Waters will be back, the filmmaker and bad boy. Also, we have a book called On the Trail of the Jackalope, How a Legend Captured the World's Imagination and Helped Us Cure Cancer, which is a really interesting book about I guess you'd say, the etiology of the horns on the jackalope, which were a growth that came out of a bacteria that causes, I don't quite understand it, but it's fascinating. So thank you very much. And unfortunately, I don't have a public restroom, so some of the eyes went big. But without further ado, I would like to thank Steve Dickerson and the people at the Poetry Center. And Steve, come on up.
One thing I realized is that we didn't establish an order by agreement with the poets.
Patrick gave us our order.
He did?
Yeah.
What is
He
it?
said that I'm reading first.
Oh, okay, well, that's what I was going to suggest too. Alphabetical order by surname. Yes. And I've asked Alistair Johnston to introduce Tinker tonight as publisher of his new book. So, you know, we are quite amazed when we look at the productivity of some of the publishers over the past couple years when everyone was languishing and Norman Fischer was at work. I have in my hand 4 books that have come out since 2021. Nature from Toowoomba Press, Lineaginians Press. There was a Clattering As, which is from Lavender Ink. No applause for that one? The Museum of Capitalism from Daniels Jensen. And then this book, which is the newest of those 4, is a selected poems put up by Charles Alexander's Chax Press, and really lovely book. It has Fanny Howe on the back. It's a selected poems, goes back to 1980. And Fanny Howe says, Norman Fischer's new book is like a house with many mansions. Each mansion is explored room by room. The rooms are poems, and the poet seems to move unconscious of positive negativity, unobstructed liberty, paradoxes without stress. The syntax alters in these mansions of thought. They were not built by monks in the 13th century, but by a priest in the Zen tradition in the United States during a millennial shift. The poems walk through language structures they have inherited and interpreted. You can identify their location by shifts in their twists of words and sentences. They're looking for a perfect way to say what they're looking at, but the world is like water without an image in it. In its calm appraisals, the poems begin to find figures of substance and resting places worth looking for, living for. Norman Fischer.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much. Wow, I'm really happy to be here. Really, really happy to be here and honor Tinker's book. This is a big thrill. Yeah, mostly I would like to read from my selected poems. And I also chose something else to read from, maybe if I have time, which is none of those books that Steve mentioned. So this is from a book that was published in 2000 called Success. And it's 28 lines a day, every day of the year, in whatever year it was. And a selection of that was made from those 365 poems, and that was the book Success. So every poem is dated, and I'll read just a couple of these. Tuesday, 17 April. No, that's not the one I want to read. Sunday, 23 June. Thought, not experiences. Or is it experiences, not thoughts and words? Are experiences not thoughts, or are thoughts that are experienced as meanings? Pure experience beyond words, could there be such a thing? Could there be ocean without waves, or waves without ocean? And could I now be elsewhere than here at any other time? No one reads poetry, or at least no one reads my poetry, not even me. And there is a reason for this. And it is that it would be impossible for anyone to read what is written. They are only reading air, somewhere other than here, where the needle point of reality pierces the interstices of the poem. But this is not the poem. Sunday, 1 July. Seeing people and seeing them again, they seem to repeat the further on they get. And it's no surprise that the dim corner where the table is, no, not that one, probably the other one. Certainly concentration, by which I mean holding what's nearest in the middle warmly so the voices don't argue with one another, and no incentive to leave the area before the police arrive, but you do. Going up to the top of the mountain according to the long route where you can look down and see everything from inside out. I do not deny that a swarm of them would languish at the point I wish to make, is firmly made, even beforehand. It gets more and more difficult the closer to the end you get, the fewer the possibilities. Friday, 27 July. Not a matter of the poem's responding to its impulse, rather the other way round. To hope to chart or press upon a soul in sorrow some upward forming arc the lines carry, and in the fluidity of language make a heart that's plugged, unplugged, or anyway, such is the hope eternal the muse dangles to all her sad and useless slaves. The work of the world weighs more than the total of beings it's done to serve, and what we get pulls down harder than what we give flies up, so that we float someplace. Midstream, alas, probably. Or just the trick of speech and meter, more likely. If you think about anything long and deep enough, it's soon beyond hope. Well, if you don't, you're sunk even beyond thinking. Now, this is a poem or two from another volume called Questions, Places, Voices, Seasons. And this comes from the voices part, where I'm writing in different voices. And this voice is a rabbi from Lithuania around 1820 or so. Prayer for my wife. This is a prayer for my wife, dear God, who moves no matter where she moves, whether in air, on earth, or underwater, God forbid, at the precise center of my life, where I know you should live, forgive me, in the fullness of every good thought, every worthwhile and kind deed I do. Oh God, praise her and protect her so she won't get sick or be seriously hurt by anything. And since I know that because of my sins and the weakness of the flesh, so poor as always in your eyes, this is impossible, I am asking you to do it anyway. Because you are the God who turned back the seas, fed us in the wilderness, leading us by a pillar of fire, and such things for you are surely possible, should you wish to grant them. Or, if you are offended by my asking, Please instead grant that her falls not be from high places, and her scrapes and bruises not so rough and painful, and that the heavy pots she lifts, the pails of milk, be made slightly less weighty in her arms. May her soul's sufferings be likewise lightened, lifted up gently toward heaven by your ministering angels, so that she will become used to them and not complain. And when, dear God, I am gone away and cannot help her, please do your best to be her support, so that she be well and safe and happy and satisfied in a world that is well enough and sufficient. And I bless you, God, in advance for granting these things and providing me with such a radiant bride. You know my wife. Prayer for laborers. May all who labor with their hands, those who clean and cook, make beds and remove garbage, those who fashion things of this world as you have fashioned this world, of words, of your mouth, those who make small things crafted by hand or very large things in the city's factories, but especially the smaller things of the earth made in small workshops near here. Things like shirts or spoons or shoes, carts, pins and paper, buckets, rope. May all who make these things receive from you special blessings. Unhidden. I have given up the world, it's cheap, but have not known it. Wear worldly clothes, a fool pretending to transcend time, which pierces me. I push through snow. My face is snow. Entire snow, white surf on Kiso's hanging bridge. Not a thing moves which is moving. A tool to open up the danger. So deep, I cannot see the bottom. We have technical difficulties. Wouldn't really be a real reading if you didn't have at least one technical difficulty. I guess. You know, I'm stuck on the pivot of my knowing well what's perfect. As jewel gleam on crest of wave can't be grasped, as mind's light, clear in glancing, is neither so in me nor not so, which I suffer. This is from the same volume, Questions, Places, Voices, Seasons. This is from the Seasons part. And these are written in very short lines and stanzas. So many days of fog, then not. Can I even recall winter's rains? All the seasons. Is it so very long? Summer lasts forever. Its end ends. And where does summer move on to? What white mysterious skies. Touching the tabletop convinces that it's there. Eating seasonable plum seems so true to life. Thanks to eye and sun, eye that the sun made. I say I see the Indonesian stool blaze yellow light. They say that's summer light, the last delicious and apparent rays. October. Words a stuttering, each forced from the throat, drawn forth, pulled out through worlds sad need, each a pearl or pool bright with cherished promise, as if to fly into the face of things that call for them to complete the silence, even lit pieces of words, remnants not of thought or feeling, but for themselves. Words music, their utter futile charm, continue us, human necessity, skin and flesh, air they breathe, and castles they build in plain air. And this is from another book called Conflict, which is a serial poem about conflict, everything that I could write about conflict. And it has voices in it, and so sometimes when I read it, if I'm able to, I read the voices, so I haven't gone entirely bonkers. It's the voice in the poem. Instructed by God, both sons of Abraham, Christians, Muslims, this dusty Lagos neighborhood, torn apart or cleared, all are Christian. The lame are walking and the blind are now seeing. Why have I not found favor in your eyes to set the burden of this entire people on me now? Did I conceive this, birth it, that you should tell me, carry them all the way home as father, mother, and they cry at me, give us meat to eat, give us meat. Well, kill me if that is how it is. Humans and their maker have an undying basis of conflict. The one beyond, the other inside, the one inside, the other beyond. Imperfect speech strains to divide, unite, as they are not. Eve, Cain, Moses, the divine human tangle, the head, the voice, saw daily the wonders, yet moan, murder, maraud, and the relations between God and Abraham's descendants are aimed eventually at resolving this damage. The whole of it lost, it seems, at sea. No mere disintegration, a jewel-like collapse. Sea change in the soul, devolving distractions, all a fever to the foam. Now, more speak you too. Now we're in another book called The Strugglers. And this is from the title series called The Strugglers, which is a whole bunch of poems with titles. And these are all written in memorial to and after Leslie Scalapino, who we all miss a lot. She was one of the great Bay Area poets. Rushing through factories. As if in a panic when the election was rigged, as the Han rushed through Uyghurs' factories, killing them, as if in a panic of frenzied agitation, as a tick, as if having to decide suddenly whether to kill or be killed, these actions, not events outside, but inside, the pressure of their feeling, as if outside had burst in the mobs, rushing through factories, leaving the orphan girls as slaves almost from birth, to be prostitutes for them because of their terror, seemingly urgently needing some kind of violence in sex that themselves they'd never do, but because of the terror and panic do, flashing messages to one another to gather in the square to protest nonviolently, but the government with superior force of arms as if protecting each person from the emotion inside that person, or fear or terror of what could happen, monstrously imagined when things are completely out of control, smashing their heads open, is thrilling. To see their glistening blood is calming them the next day. Swinging space determinators. Then the stream rushing by is young girls, it's not water. Rushing by with history's full force, everything's so dysfunctional, violence is normal, violations normal. This is what they make TV shows about because it's the water we drink. Therefore, of the passion, the girls become water, not people, yet not yet that, because of the trauma that's common as water, as dirt. They wear dog tags, they commune with dogs who are kind to them, understand them, growing on trees, pulling the fruit from trees as if monkeys, but they're lost in the branches, can't see, can't feel earth beneath their feet. They're nowhere. They swing from branch to branch, implicitly fearing a fall that will end their servitude as a cakewalk without mercy. The words mercy, repentance, forgiveness, sin, having no longer any meaning, nor violence, violation, servitude. As far as the skateboarders are concerned, there's no sense at all beyond speed and the need to ride up walls defying gravity. So this is a very long poem that is hard to hear. And so I'm only going to, and of course it's not, the whole poem isn't in the selected, it's just a part of it. But even the little part of it that's in the selected is hard to hear and read. Not that it's unpleasant, it's just pretty boring. So, so I'll just read a bit of it, yeah. And the name of the poem is Recognition. You can't hear? You can hear okay? All right. Recognition. This is a little piece of it. So many people to worry about. We can never come to the end of worrying about people. So many people worrying about people. We can never come to the end of people worrying about people, worrying about people. So many worried people. We worry about them. We do not come to the end of worrying about them. We worry, they worry, we worry about them, they worry about us, they worry, we worry. We do not come to the end of this. They worry, we worry about them, people, 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 people. They are not abstract. They do not come to an end, they come to an end. They come to the end. They come to their end. They come to our end. They never come to the end of worrying about them. We never come to the end of worrying about them where they are ending and coming to the end of their ending. So many endings. So many people, 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 such worry of them, such worry about them. They worry, we worry. They never come to the end. We worry about them ever. There is never an end to our worry about people, worrying about people. So many people to worry about us. Such we, such us, such them, such worry, such people. So many people, each one being one, each one being them, each another, each other, and none other than her, me, I, then they, we, us, then them, and we. Such people, such worries, so many worries we can worry about. These, those, our, their, people, 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 people. There's never any end to it. We worry about them. Never, ever, forever. They, we, such worry about them is not abstract. They are facing us. We see their faces. This is before masks. Now, not so much, but in those days, we see their faces and worry about them. There's no end to worrying about their faces, facing our faces, facing them. We worry about them facing us. They worry about us and we and them and they and us and them, worrying about their faces, facing them, their faces facing us, worrying about us, facing them. And there's no end to faces. No end to facing faces, faces, facing faces, being a face, being faces, worrying about faces in consequence of that, to face, being face to face a face, being faces, facing faces. It's worry, ever worry, never worry, with no end to it. How could there be an end to it? We worry about their faces that are not abstract, living faces, living, facing the faces and the living aliveness, expressions, animations, fluid, fragmented, fictive, fulminating, dancing faces, faces fanning out amid faces, thick-skinned faces, thin-skinned faces, dark faces, light and dark faces, faces of darkness, faces of light, forever faces, ever faces, never faces. We worry about them. They are worried about us. It's not abstract. Anyway, I read it once at a Zen teachers meeting, and they didn't like it. They really didn't like it. Yeah. Well, they thought, like, because it goes on. I read the whole thing. It goes on quite a while, and they thought, was I kidding them? Was I making this is what was I making a fool out of them? What was I doing? So I think that I will just conclude. I think I have just a minute or two, right? Just another minute. Go. Yeah. So I'm gonna. This is a book that I really like. This book, and it sort of is kind of obscure because it was published in France, in an English edition and a French edition, and I think nobody particularly noticed it. But it's again another serial poem. Do you know this one? Yeah, another serial poem. Which is sort of an acrostic in that there's a bunch of poems that begin with A, a bunch of poems that begin with B through the alphabet, and I'm going to read you some of the V poems, and then I'll be done. Vertiginous oracle, against which I staggers back and detained future caught in the here and now. Defined precisely as being ever unable to appear despite multiple illusions, because of continuous appearance in the minds of acolytes. A horror of belief closes down the question, that is itself answer, to the frozen stamens of the pristine rose, emissaries of the vulgate or vulgar. Spit out words from under their umbrella souls, crafted by blind white people in the pink. Difference dooms their flesh, which belongs to the others, to vicariousness. Vagrant mountains, late sun like an eye, blazes through sky's parchment, away in a manger, etc. The cloud-weathered gentle hills seem impossibly close, though very far away. Mind's eye's most intimate dream, confounding love of fun's sheer force, perception's ageless key. Virtual reverence falls from the sky, fleecy mana. The panting animal alive on the table bleats into the text, flinging me skyward, snapping me firmly into place. It's hard to be this dead. Harder still to be alive to this feeling. Night and day are as different as night and day in the mind of any language speaker. The words are mere words, and remain so till riptide relaxes. The terrifying walls of water to either side, solid as acacia wood or unhewn stone, about to crash down in mitered chunks around my ankles, like crumpled underwear. Regardless of one's precious accomplishments, there's no excuse for anyone's having taken up so much valuable space and airtime that ought to have remained misty and pure. Instead, I bobs and dips like a coastline buoy whose little bells chime, "See me, see me," into the terrible blue sky, in which a single white gull, lonely, hypothetical, and pure, dips dramatic toward shore. Thank you, Tinker and Poetry Project, for inviting me. I'm really, really happy to be here. And thanks everybody for listening. It was great to be. I recommend to everybody to have a chance to be listened to by other people. It's great. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Let's welcome Alistair Johnston, who is the publisher of Poltroon Press.
I just wanted an opportunity to take my mask off. Thank you, Patrick, for hosting. Thank you, Stephen, for organizing this. Thank you, Norman, for that great reading. That was really fun. Tinker Green. Tinker is a thinker. He's a creator. He's a musician. And I'm going to amplify a little on that. He told me when he was a young boy growing up in Vermont, he got the mumps and was confined to his bed for a week. And he'd just gotten interested in fishing, and he'd sent away for this fly fishing kit, how to tie your own flies. And so he sat there in bed in a fever with this plastic tray and started making these fancy, elaborate tied things with colored thread and beads and feathers and something that no fish would ever want to go near. As a teenager, he got a job in a furniture factory where a lot of the employees were second-generation Italian immigrants. And they had a brass band and would get together on a Sunday and play Sousa marches and so on. And Tinker joined on trombone. I met him when he moved to San Francisco in the early 80s and was part of the poetry scene around New College of California. And I went to visit him at his place on San Jose Avenue, and he took me to the most fabulous lunch I've ever had around the corner, 25th and Mission, a place called La Taqueria. Yes, exactly. Every September, while he lived in San Francisco, he would go off for a week up above Yosemite and go into the wilderness, like St. Jerome. It was actually in 1903 that John Muir invited the president, Teddy Roosevelt, to go with him on a backpacking trip in the Yosemite and persuaded him that he should start a series of national parks to protect these spaces. So 100 years later, I asked Tinker if I could come along on one of his ventures. So we drove up to a place called Desolation, a name that's guaranteed to put off casual hikers. And we checked in at the ranger station to get a permit, and they said, what's your cell phone number? And we looked at each other, and we looked at the ranger and said, we don't have a cell phone. And they said, come on, you're a couple of old guys. So what if something happens to you? We said, we'll be all right, we'll be all right. You won't have to worry about us. So we went and set off, and I said, I hope we don't run into any bears or mountain lions. And Tinker said, I hope we do run into bears and mountain lions. So we got up to a high rocky plateau and got off the trail and made camp. We got off the trail so we could have a fire, which is highly illegal. But you have to have a fire. And we started to bed down and watch the sun go down. And possibly to forestall me making any cracks about Ben Lomond or Ben Nevis in the Highlands of Scotland, he told me about the time he brought a German girl up there on a hiking trip. And she got there and looked around and said, this is awful. Nothing like the Alps, where we have the Blumen, the Edelweiss. So I did complain. Not about the rocks. I did manage to tear out the seat of my pants sliding down a scree, but I was mostly behind Tinker, so it wasn't too obnoxious for him. And we had a really great time, and I was glad that I wasn't with him the subsequent trip when, like St. Augustine, he got in a cave up there in a horrible thunderstorm without a lion to protect him, and that was the epiphany that led to the title poem of Blue Flame Ring. So here's an inside joke for all you poetry people. In the words of the late, great Anselm Hollow, Tinker Green.
Okay. Well, it's raining, which is wonderful. So I have a poem about rain. Of course, all these poems, almost all of them are San Francisco poems, because I lived here for almost 40 years. But I've had to move away. But then, so it's been very great to be back and to have it be sort of like winter on this visit. This is out in the Sunset District near 19th Avenue. A morning, 10:30. The cats are asleep at the eastern gate. Guardian lions, everything quiet. Darkness at the center like the spine of the Buddha pulls the house together, the connecting hall. Winter with misty rain and hushed traffic, breathing. I've got these all on, little numbered. I have to leaf around to find the next one. And I also got to put my glasses on. All right, so I thought that I would start off with how I started. I stopped writing for a long time. When I first moved out here, maybe it took me a while to get used to being in a new place. But I started writing again out in Bolinas, where I'm going after this. I'm going out there for a couple of days on this trip. And I house sit for Bob Grenier. And while I was there, he had a house. I'm just talking a little bit so you get used to my voice. He had a house that called Briarcombe that was a place that poets could get fellowships to and wrote. But eventually, Bob Grenier just started renting the place because she got tired of having to find new poets to go there. So, but he was going away, and every time he went away, he had dogs and pets that had to be taken care of. So I became his go-to house sitter, and that was great. And one day, though, I wrote this poem, and the reason I want to start with it, it's not that great a poem, but it was the beginning of my second career of writing, which is pretty much all in here. And it involved being at the house and starting to just look around. What's here? What's around me? And that's like the beginning for almost everything. I seem to have a habit of starting over. And every time I finished one of my little pamphlets, months would go by before I could write anything else because I had to start all over again. So this was my start at Bob's. A little shell hangs from a thread in the kitchen. It looks like a death's head. Bob's running shoes upside down on the woodpile by the door. The record player is in front of the fireplace, way too huge TV. We move them. Books in impossible vertical dizzy stacks we don't dare touch. On tables and shelves are compulsive arrangements of stones and shells that haven't changed in 6 or 7 years, and a scattered array of Xeroxed pieces of paper, postcards, a picture of snowy owls, etc. on the walls, unchanged as well. What's happening is we are looking inward at the slow-moving constellations with Bob. The house looks outward towards Bolinas Ridge, where the morning revolves nightward to pass the point of sunset with a blazing flash of color, as does, probably, Bob. 2. Awakened from murderous dreams. The ridge is swathed in gauzy strips of mist, twisted like the sheets. Another layer of illusion, reflected body in the window glass as you settle on your heels after sliding back the curtains. Last night I burst into Vladimir's to get directions to Monka's. A hellish scene. Everyone was drunk and shouting. Vladimir's head bent in the haze as he opened another bottle. Out again, under a million silent stars, our car parked across the road, steaming slightly in the cool. 3. After my run, I sit and listen to the sounds Bob's house makes. A rustling in the trees turns out to be a flock of sparrows gathering or nibbling on acorns, seething in the oaks subliminally. A woodpecker taps his little hammer so as to not to disturb any sleeper. Little sticks lightly strike my leg. I hold my breath when the big event happens, an acorn loudly striking the roof, sinking silently into my heart. Well, let's see, where is number 3? Okay, I was going to just read you another Bolinas poem, because that became a place where I did my writing. Here we go. Problem is these little stickies stick to each other also. Bolinas again, so several years later. People ask me, how's it going at Bob's? I come up the path as Bob's cat gazes accusingly at me through a front door of scratched plastic. Then he leads me to the back to show me the potted tree has blown over. Meanwhile, Samuel's cats have ripped open a package of granola. All night, blowing wind and bursts of rain, two women in print dresses pull into the driveway, pick apples, leave. Beneath a tree at dusk hovers an unmoving deer, forked antlers under a thatch of branches. Later, moonless darkness, as thick as molasses, harsh turkey laughter from the trees. And this is the third Bolinas poem. If you know Bolinas, out there, there's a stretch of road that's called the 13 Curves. Many mornings, but especially Sunday, the early peace of Bolinas is shattered by visiting motorcycles. They roar up Route 1, heading for the 13 curves. Now, no one has ever counted exactly 13 curves in this stretch of road. It comes out different every time you try it. Lying in bed, awakened by the Sunday morning invasion, it seems to me that the motorcycles are trying to say the name of the 13 curves, but can't quite manage it. Their incoherent snarl is loud with annoyance. Once they have gone, it is peaceful again, and the road thinks the 13 curves quietly to itself. Okay. Well, if I can't find that one, I gotta read it. Okay. Now we got it. All right, this is now we're back in the Sunset District. Different kind of weather. Today, no fog. Last night we went out to a Chinese restaurant, never eaten there before, but everything familiar. The White Stone Lions. I seem to be obsessed with lions. You know? Never eaten there before, but everything familiar. The White Stone Lions framing the doorstep, the swirling fish tank, clashing brocades. Out here, it's more than 50% Chinese, so it feels like family, though we have to ask for a fork. As usual, everyone's on the cell phone with someplace else. Today, no fog. The sun is bright. The hill falls away to the sea, colors vivid as a cartoon. A day with no meaning. A woman lifts a bottle of spring water to her lips. It comes from nowhere at all. Now that sounds impossible, and it is impossible. I wrote that as ironic. Of course water comes from everywhere, but there is a certain mood when everything is sensuality, is sense, and nothing actually, you don't bother to make sense of it. It just happens. Here's another sunset poem. Baudelaire is the title I put on it, which has nothing to do with the poem at all. Or very little. Wednesday morning and a smell of fresh insecticide in the air. Two cops in shorts on a bench outside Starbucks. It's the 4th of July, and my aunt says she's flying her flag indoors so no one can steal it. Kenny Dorham's loud check jacket on the cover of Midnight at the Cafe Bohemia. How goes it, Kenny? My America, a swim in the river, then silent tar beach rooftops, city, as dark fireworks spill from the end of his horn. 15 lines. There's no other characteristics. Okay. I wrote this to a piece of music, Beethoven's 10th Quartet. They don't usually refer to them as numbers, and I've forgotten what the key signature is and everything. Beethoven's 10th String Quartet. Huge pieces of ice move down the river. Along the shore, tangled silhouettes of tree trunks, puffs of smoke, brick streets, huge wooden wheels, steeples painted silver, a baby in a box, blue cup and yellow saucer. Lightning flickering along the horizon. The horses are crazy. Crowds out the window. In the mirror, with its dark wooden frame, the paper bursts into flame. These are just little sketches. I was going to, maybe I'll read it now. Something that Norman said off the cuff in the middle of this, in response to what some of you people, I put this as an epigraph to one of my little pamphlets. Who says my poems are poems? My poems are not poems. When you know my poems are not poems, then we can speak of poetry. So, Zen Koan by Ryokan. Okay. There we go. Oops. Well, I can read this one next. This is about USF, the hill, which is Lone Mountain. And as I put as a footnote in here, in the early decades of the 20th century, San Francisco's cemeteries on Lone Mountain, some 47,000 graves, were dug up and moved, of course, to Colma. But not everybody knows that that used to be a graveyard. You do have to know that to understand, or nobody can understand this poem. But it's one of the keys to it. This is called An Apocalypse. And there's a lot of construction seemingly all the time up at UCF, and there still is today. I went by there on an Uber drive, and there's bulldozers everywhere. They're just trying to put up more buildings and make more money, I guess. Angels over Lone Mountain, thousands of souls rising from disturbed graves in a flaming vortex, boiling with ghostly bones to the sound of a reedy harmonium, a quavering trombone, a piano thrown from the cliff behind USF. All the notes shrink at once to a pinprick. The clock on the tower ticks, and ancient footprints crisscross the hill. Here on earth, a huge din. Learning goes up in smoke by the century while crosses are driven into the compacted dirt of the precipice of skulls. The worm stirs amongst bulldozers that drowned out the radio waves. Next to a collapsing tower, a rock hangs in the sky. And then comes the silent moment when the sun stands still. Time is breathing hard since everything's exploding like the sun, as does the Milky Way, which is scattered over night's purple towels, snapping now in the maddeningly incessant wind. The telescope inches along its track while the sky burns. Can you hear the thunder of boulders colliding in the river? That's the sound of the train that will carry us to paradise. So a little comment on that one is, it's about sound, right? The sound of those boulders. What that word was, I was in the Sierras in the springtime and sleeping, and I heard this deep knocking sound coming up from the ground. And I realized that what it was the force of the spring runoff moving huge boulders the size of houses in the riverbed and making this deep noise. So that's what I figure is the sound of the end of the world. This is the reverse of that. Another 4th of July poem. Central Valley 4th, or you got to know, this is a prose poem. A lot of this stuff is prose. In fact, I'm going to read a couple of pieces because I've had requests. A couple of pieces that are, to my mind, straight prose, but who knows how to define them. Central Valley 4th of July. They call it a rest area, but it isn't actually a place any more than is the howling void of the highway, which is sheer travel time. No one will ever live here, except perhaps after a nuclear disaster, which for some reason comes to mind. The attendants buzzing about on miniature tractors travel hundreds of miles from their homes to make a show of working here, but nothing is thereby accomplished. They maintain a fiction. Just beyond the rest stop is farmland, which is real, with full-size tractors. An angel with a flaming sword guards the invisible border. At the time we pull in, it's 115 degrees Fahrenheit outside the car. The heat stuns. A woman in a sari approaches a faucet, turns it on, pours water over her head. A huge man sprawls sleeping in the shade of a tree, bringing to mind a hauled-up sea mammal. Sari woman goes to her vehicle and brings her children back to the faucet to show them how to cool themselves. A teenage girl tries to wake the sleeping man, but gives up. Stock still she stands, wondering what to do, as dozens of behemoth trucks idling in rows throw even more heat into the stifling air. Okay, I wrote, actually there was an allusion to this, yes, about how I grew up in Vermont. So I decided to try and write memories about growing up in Vermont, and I found I couldn't write about memories straight. But then suddenly it occurred to me, you don't have to actually tell the truth. You could just make stuff up. So that led me to interfusing fantasy with reality here. But this is pretty much what was perhaps going on in my mind as a child. Or both, or neither. My Vermont is a hayfield and a stuffy attic, piles of Life magazine in rows like bales of cut hay. A noisy airplane with a star on its side is buzzing the well we found near the tree partway up the hill under a rotting lid. Past mossy stonework, we drop clumps of dirt through the cloud to watch the flash when they hit the surface far below. 2 miles to town and the woods are thick with Germans and abandoned automobiles. The Beatty brothers wear berets. Their rifles stand next to the bulldozer. Squinting through the smoke of their Gaulois, they siphon gas. Over the lake, the thunderheads gather as rabbits run from the side. That's also a sonnet. 14 lines. Okay, so now I will read you Blue Flame Ring. Actually, although you say it gives the name to this thing, what I particularly liked, and when it was suggested that I use that as the title for the whole book, the reason I liked it was the Blue Flame Ring actually referred to a section that I cut out of the piece. So there's no mention of Blue Flame Ring in here. Blue Flame Ring. Last fall, this is just a story about my hiking trip. Last fall, I spent an unplanned night at an inhospitable spot high in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Backpacking alone, I had hoped to cross the 13,000-foot Kings Kern Divide using a rarely traveled route, but was caught by a change in the weather right at the highest point of the so-called pass. Toward the end of my 4th day of wilderness travel, it was getting late. I'd spent the afternoon climbing through fields of boulders. All that was up there were rocks and slopes of precarious scree. No tinkling streams hopping cheerfully down the slope, no plant life of any kind, not even a wandering bird. Nothing but silence, except for the wind and an occasional tumbling stone or tendril of sliding gravel. Contrary to the Old Testament, which suggests the higher you go, the closer you might feel to a spiritual presence, I just felt alone. Alone in an echoing silence and the terrifying specificity of the spires and walls of crumbling rock. There was no God up there, no thunder, but the roaring in my ears. Clouds were massing towards the west. Pieces of them would tear off and float over the crest of the divide, seemingly close enough to reach out and touch. I wasn't particularly worried, though, because the same weather had happened toward nightfall the evening before. The fire drill I'd gone through then, methodically finding shelter and gathering. I didn't bring a tent, you see. Finding shelter and gathering several days' worth of wood had come to nothing once the sun dropped. But now, resting next to a large boulder for a bit of shelter and peering into my last cupful of water, I noticed with a shock that it was beginning to snow. My head jerked up. Another reason for the pause was I hadn't figured out where the pass was. I had expected at least a few footprints, but there had been none, not this year, and perhaps not for half a decade. I saw two conceivable routes, a high exposed one over a bumpy slab, which looked nearly impassable, or a scree chute bordered by two jagged sawtooth ridges, perhaps lower and certainly more inviting. Night, and now snow, was coming, and I had to decide fast. I picked the chute. It was harder going than it looked from below. The unstable scree slid under my feet, so I kept close to the wall to have some place to grab. It was snowing lightly, and I was still in shorts because I didn't want to take the time to change. Throwing all my strength into the climb, it took me 2 hours to claw to the top. From the crest, I peered down into a gloomy and impassable abyss, swirling with snow. It was not the pass. Okay, this was getting serious. I dug in my pack for a sweater and my one cooking glove and started back down. The going was even harder descending, and I was in a hurry. At one point, I tumbled and gashed my leg, but fortunately, it was otherwise unhurt. What I was looking for was a dark hole in the rock I had passed on the way up that promised protection from the wind and cold. Just at sunset, I finally got to it. To the west, a gleam of golden sunlight broke from under the cloud cover, and I realized the storm would end almost as soon as it began, and I was not going to die. Days from the trailhead, way late in the season, far off the track, and up the wrong pass to boot. And also, we've reached the point I want to get to with this piece. Outside, it was dark and spitting snow, and stiff winds were battering the rock and steep tilted sand. But inside the little cave, I could lie down and pull my long underwear over my bloody leg, don my down vest to help quell my violent shivering. After using the pack to stuff a deep hole in the bottom of the cave, I could spread out the short foam pad and unroll my puffy purple sleeping bag on it, zip it back up around me, and people, that felt so good. No dinner, not even any tea. It was barely sundown, and all I wanted was to sink into unconsciousness. I was John Keats, longing for delicious oblivion. And for months afterwards, back home, sitting up at the computer late into the night, it was the recollection of that sense of protected sleep as a bottomless but attractive black hole that would convince me to turn into bed. I awoke once in the middle of the night. The wind had died down, and the moon was out. I peered drowsily past the cave opening, and the sky seemed to be traversed with glowing lines and blotchy clouds like nothing I'd ever seen before. A sky scribbled with mysterious but profoundly meaningful symbols. I went back to sleep, and in the morning realized that what I'd taken for sky was actually the rocky walls of the chute, animated, so to speak, by moonlight. So now I'm going to switch. In this book, one of the unusual things, the only things that are not part of these series of pamphlets that I used to pass out at readings and mail to my friends, is a little section of poems that I wrote before I moved to San Francisco. So this actually is the earliest poem, almost, that I've preserved. I wrote this when I first moved to Burlington, Vermont, from New York, back to where I'd grown up. It's called The Pleasures of Sleep, and it just seemed appropriate to follow after that particular piece. The Pleasures of Sleep. The balloon man sits on my pillow, preparing my dreams with a sharp knife. There are shapes in the darkness, like pine paneling, and little stars tickling my eyes. Then comes the sinking, like rigging slipping on a moonlit ship, and subcoverlet stirrings, like preparation for battle. My nervous system begins to chirp. My hair is practically a harp. The cellos strike up. The shepherds halloo. The rain descends in the champagne. There's another Burlington, Vermont poem. Bar called Finbars. And I put this little tale, which has nothing to do with the poem, as the title. In Finbars, on a certain date, which I won't even mention, an empty beer glass exploded for no apparent physical cause at a table where several poets were sitting after a reading. This is true. But in these days, I wrote poems using chance procedures somewhat. So I would write lines following Ted Berrigan's reuse of lines and circulating just little fragments from his notebooks. So I went through a phase of just writing lines and then reordering them. And usually the chance order was much better than any I could have come up with by myself, I thought. Twitching, drawn to the center, anywhere you want to go, because it will end. Damp, like a glass, collapsed. A string, smoke, air, gold. A river of blood, block of earth, cup of tea, in the air, sweet. Did you see those ducks? Dissolved. I know you care. With your hand, moths, moving from room to room. Cracked on the tablecloth. Fires, twitching, drawn to the center. Anywhere you want to go, because it will end. Damp like a glass, collapsed. A string, smoke, air, gold, river of blood, block of earth, cup of tea, in the air, sweet. Did you see those ducks? Etc. You can read this endlessly. All right. Now, finally, as I approach the end here, I'm going to read, what am I going to read? Oh, yes, the poem that has the lion in it about St. Jerome. I wrote a sequence of 5 poems from going to the Chicago Art Institute. And I discovered after trying to write about, I just wanted to do pictures, describe pictures. And then I realized I can't describe a specific picture. It was better to write genera, you know, what types of. So I have a description of a standard portrait, which I just went to see the Alice Neal show. So I was thinking of reading that, but I got to read the St. Jerome one, which I'm taking as a genre, saint iconography and so forth. So here's that poem. St. Jerome in the Wilderness. And I think it's possible this might be a little bit of a self-portrait, kind of. Not that I think I'm a saint. St. Jerome in the Wilderness. Each morning I get up and look out from the entrance to my cave, hill upon hill, disappearing into the blue. Grotesque rock formations, but no sign of man. Nothing is solid, though I point to the skull, which gleams like brass on my desk, a bell of warning next to the hourglass. I work at my book, which belongs to the future. Do I exist? Words pour through me like an untamed river, making for an unforeseen sea. I have taken off the big red hat they gave me and hung it on the wall next to the model of a church. At my feet sleeps a dangerous lion, my only friend. The hat in the church where he did do various clerical work for the church. I mean, not clerical, but, he founded churches and was a bishop. And then he retired to the wilderness to work on translating the New Testament. Okay, now I'm going to read another prose piece by request. There's a place in California's High Sierra, scores of them actually, where sheep herders obviously camped. Crude graffiti carved in the bark of trees testify to repeated occupancy by semi-literate Basques. They look recent, though they aren't. Persistent sheep herders had to be evicted by years of infantry patrols after the mountains were declared national parks a century or more ago. Sites that are far from a trailhead are largely undisturbed. A few stones to make a fireplace and a high, warm meadow near dependable water. Somebody's summer home. Mine too, for a few days. I've moved infrequently over the course of my life. couple of decades growing up in Vermont, a decade as a young man in Manhattan, another decade back in Burlington, 3 decades in San Francisco, 12 houses by my quick count. But I have never felt deeply at home in any of them. Where I have felt at home was in a couple of borrowed living situations and in that High Sierra sheepherders camp. Some theorize that rootlessness is a hallmark of modernity, or that it is fundamental to the human condition. Perhaps, starting with simian ancestry, we are natural nomads. I have walked hundreds of miles in cities. I am profoundly happy and satisfied, hopping a field of rocks high in the trackless wilderness. This has been true since I was a boy. Although the house I grew up in, of course, seems central and my dreams often still occur there, dark drain hole in the middle of the rotating vortex of my life. It was in the widening orbits of exploration through the countryside around it that I developed a sense of a separate destiny for myself. We lived a couple of miles outside the village amidst woodland and stone and walls and pastures. Down the back road that eventually led to other towns, a tiny stream of water crossed the road through a culvert. As it neared the culvert, it descended through a rock-lined pool bordered by ferns and nodding columbines, a shady, tinkling secret spring. The spot was tiny and wouldn't be noticed from the road unless you knew it was there. This was where the treasure was hid. Across the road, the stream continued through a stand of conifers, its floor a spongy bed of moss and needles, a magic forest. I know how to find this place if it's still there. The natural world changes. Where is it really? No matter what the town clerk says, no one owns it. Is it in the forest of fairy tales? When Emily Dickinson asks, "Have you got a brook in your little heart?" Is she talking about this one? Well, yes. But it's also more real than a dream told in a tale or a symbol in a poem. When it bubbles through the stone wall, you can actually scoop the cold water and drink it. The stream is in motion, and so are you. You have left the fantasy home of history, geographical context, rumination, and are circling freely about. There, where the brook crosses under the road, you find a kernel of actuality, of encounter, and it tastes good. So if I can find it, I want to read just a couple more poems. And what number would it be? Sorry, I'll read you this. My eyes just went past it. Each moment of flaming forever that pops shut into nevermore. I had trouble finding it the other time. I should have put a table of contents in this book. But anyway, I can't read that. So I guess I will close. Is that enough time?
Go.
You want me to read more?
Yes.
Okay. I'll read you what counts for me as a long poem then, and then just a couple after that. This is kind of a rant. The car is leaving for the funeral. The car is leaving for the funeral. Slight drizzle. The flowers are wilting and full of insects. The bill is wrong. The feet hurt in unfamiliar shoes. If I had a question, I've forgotten it. The map goes dark. The refrigerator won't close. Stubbing toes approaching the lake through the woods in the dark. No moon. Not enough money for that. Go to the stationery store for some labels. Encounter a fellow poet wandering the aisles, staggering slightly pale under the harsh fluorescent lights, lips moving. The cannons begin firing in the distance. Woe to the shelterless on a night like this. The fire won't light. The answer back. Flashes of pointless irritation. Stagnant water. The nails spill all over the floor. Fox in the henhouse last night, feathers and gore. Dead battery. Can't find the ticket. Cramps. Bruises. Sores. Cough. Broken water heater. Burnt stew. Hole in pocket. Coins dripping down the pant leg and into the shoe. Computer down. Spilled wine. The page rips. The trumpet is out of tune. Phone call late at night, driving through the dark and silence. Box after box of junk, dust on everything. Strong pain in back. Behind schedule. Can't swallow. Bent nail. The bus is leaving without you. Rice undercooked. Pen out of ink. Can't reach that high. Wrongly accused. Dark looks and whisperings. Creaking floor. The tower falls. The string breaks. The zipper sticks. The plane dives. The wind comes up. It's too dark to play. The screen door bangs. A voice calls. It's your mother. Oh, there's the one I was going to read. I'll read it now. The reason I wanted to read this poem was because it has a line in there about how saints don't have homes, and the part of what was on my mind about that little cave I found up in the hill, and in fact the feeling at home in the sheep herders camp was, is echoed a little bit by that one line in this poem, which is about Via Selmans, the artist. Perhaps many of you may know who that is. I describe what she does. Via Selmans, saint of the number 2 pencil, spends months reproducing by hand a photograph of water or the night sky or a close-up of desert floor. She's a lace maker. Saving herself, she saves the world. In a rented car, we pass by her former Venice Boulevard address on a pilgrimage to LA sites where so many refugees sat down in the 60s. My brother, for instance, dwelt in a teepee, pitched on a rooftop, or so I'm told. Saints don't have homes. They live completely in hope and memory. Physical existence is merely a relic. In St. Clair's bedroom in Assisi, now a museum, a Franciscan monk from Australia gazes absently out the window as he greets his spiritual sister in the empty room that is his heart. Via Selmans came from Latvia, twice a refugee, first from World War II, then from the Midwest, to Los Angeles, built on pitches of sand that move in the night where the haze and the traffic shrivel into a droning chord. Unto herself, the artist gathers the numberless. She draws all day, preserving the paper from harm by a thin coat of acrylic gesso, the light on a momentary ocean wave that disappears in an instant. Clouds pass overhead, water freezes on the canals, and skaters appear to carve therein their delicate filigree. Deep into the sunset float lines generated by spiders, on which they travel vast wind-borne distances, millions of them, gleaming with reflected flame. I actually saw that in the Sierras in the fall. The spiders travel by just putting out these long strands of spider web, and then they float through the air. And just recently, this was in the New York Times, they discovered how they do that. It's electromagnetic activity of some kind that they're aware of, and they can sort of steer by it. All right, so that's what I'll close basically with that. But I'll read the first poem that I put in the book. For some reason, when I put this book together, I framed it with translations from French poetry. I've been influenced by a lot more than French poetry, but that was one of my periods that I went through of studying French poetry. Good Evening by Philip Supo. How beautiful the moon is at noon. It's summertime at the street corner of fire when the wind snores in the desert and it's nighttime in your hair. Trees are planted like hope at the edge of the trees in roads of onions. The rain protects the thought. Little indefatigable sources, are you sleeping? In the morning, gray, followed by all the snails of the night before and the day following. I go forward at the sound of trumpets. Are you sleeping? Are we sleeping? We will sleep again like sacristans. The dreams aren't ending. You are asleep, eyes open, and the lineaments disordered. Someone has been pounding on your door. It's morning already. It's morning forever. Oh, I wanted to say one more thing because there's lots of people here. What I basically do, and which this is a collection of, are little pamphlets, and I like to mail them to people. That's my way of publication. So any of you here who would like to be on my mailing list, I would love it if you would write down not just your email, although you can do that, but what I need is your snail mail, speaking of snails, address, so that I can actually mail you a physical little booklet. So I'll put this out on the counter there.
Right there if you want. People-
Leave it up here. Okay, come up here and write your name and the address.
Fantastic.
you.